I'm not sure why I'm telling you this now. Maybe I just don't want to keep carrying it anymore. It's been what, 30 years? I'm in my mid-60s now, and I've spent more of my life alone than I ever thought I would. I live out here, in this little cabin near the Cascades. It's late September 2024, and the wind is cold already, pushing through the trees. There's this particular smell of wet pine that hangs in the air after it rains. I don't know if that's just me, but it's always there, like it's part of the place. Anyway, I'm sitting here, the fire crackling in the background, and I've been thinking about the first time I saw him. I know how that sounds, but it's the truth. I never thought I'd be living with this story, or the creature. But here I am, and it comes back. It always does. Every few months, like clockwork. I've got a clip of him on an old camera, but I don't show it to anyone. No one would believe me anyway. I shouldn't be telling you this, but it's been so long, and I guess it's time to let someone else hear it. Before we continue this shocking story, we encourage you to subscribe to the channel as we are trying to reach 1,000 subscribers before the new year. I'm used to being alone. It's been that way since Carol passed. She died during the birth of our son, and then he didn't make it either. That was back in '94, 30 years ago this October. After that, I didn't see much point in staying in the city. Too many memories in every corner, too many people asking how I was doing. So I moved out here, bought this cabin for next to nothing. It's about 15 miles from the nearest town, which is really just a gas station and a post office. The road up here is gravel most of the way, turns to dirt for the last mile, gets washed out every spring. Late September, I'm usually out gathering firewood, checking the traps, doing the same things I've done for 3 decades. There's a rhythm to it that keeps me steady. Wake up when the light comes through the pines, make coffee on the wood stove, walk the property line, check for downed trees, fix whatever broke overnight. It's peaceful mostly. The kind of quiet that seeps into your bones and makes the rest of the world feel like it's happening somewhere far away. But there's always something about the woods. A presence, maybe. I've felt it more as the years go on. Some mornings, when the fog sits heavy in the valley, I swear I can hear something moving just beyond where I can see. The trees creak in ways that don't match the wind. Branches snap when there's no reason for them to snap. I used to tell myself it was just the forest doing what forests do. Wildlife, weather, the passage of time wearing everything down. I didn't talk to many people. Didn't want to. The solitude helped keep the memories alive, even if they hurt. Sometimes I'd see Carol in the way the light hit the kitchen wall. Sometimes I'd hear a baby crying in the wind, though I knew it was just my mind playing tricks. The grief never really left. It just settled into the background, like the smell of wood smoke that clings to everything out here. It started as one of those stories you hear around the campfire. Old man Darby lives 2 miles east of here, down where the creek bends around the old logging road. He's been out here longer than anyone. Came up from California in the '60s when land was cheap and people didn't ask questions. He's got to be pushing 80 now, still walks the woods every day with his dog, a blue tick hound named Sal. I'd run into him maybe once a month, usually at the trailhead where our properties meet. He'd always have a story. Strange things happening in these woods, he'd say. Things moving in the trees at night. Sounds that didn't match any animal he knew. He'd been in these mountains for 50 years, knew every bird call and every way a branch could fall. But these sounds, he said, they were different. I figured it was just talk. Everyone's got a story about the woods, especially when you live alone and the nights get long. The trees creak and moan. Coyotes make sounds that can curl your blood if you don't know what they are. Owls screech like women screaming. There's plenty to explain away if you want to, but Darby wouldn't let it go. Every time I saw him, he'd mention something new. Tracks by the creek that were too big for a man. Trees with bark stripped off higher than he could reach. Rocks stacked in patterns that didn't look natural. He even showed me one once, about a 1/4 mile from my property line. 3 stones balanced on top of each other, smooth river rocks that someone or something had carried up from the creek bed. I listened because Darby was a decent man and you don't dismiss your neighbors out here. We depend on each other in ways city people don't understand. But I didn't believe him. Not really. I thought maybe he was getting old, seeing patterns where there weren't any. Or maybe he just liked having someone to talk to. I understood that better than I wanted to admit. That was the fall of 2023. Looking back now, I should have listened closer. It was a quiet night in early November, first real cold snap of the season. I'd been sitting in front of the wood stove after dinner, reading an old paperback I'd read a dozen times before. The wind was picking up outside, rattling the windows in their frames. Around 9 o'clock, I heard it. 3 knocks, clear as day. 3 sharp, distinct knocks that seemed to come from somewhere past the tree line, maybe 50 yards out. I froze with the book open in my lap. My first thought was Darby. Maybe come to check on me before the storm hit. But Darby would have called out, would have driven up, and I would have heard his truck. I waited, listened hard. The wind kept on. The trees swayed and creaked. Nothing else came. I went back to reading, told myself it was just a branch falling against another branch. Happens all the time in the wind. But those knocks had been too evenly spaced, too deliberate. There was a rhythm to them that didn't feel random. About 20 minutes later, I heard them again. 3 knocks, same direction, same spacing. I stood up this time, walked to the window, and looked out. Nothing but darkness and the shapes of pines moving in the wind. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door. The cold hit me hard. I swept the beam across the woodpile, along the tree line, into the spaces between the trunks. Nothing moved except what the wind moved. I told myself I was hearing things, getting jumpy like Darby. I even went out to check the woodpile, thinking maybe something had shifted and was knocking against the cabin wall in the wind. But the pile was solid, nothing loose, nothing that could make that sound. I went back inside and locked the door, sat there for another hour listening. The knocks didn't come again that night, but I didn't sleep well. Kept waking up. Sure, I'd heard something. In the morning, I walked out to where I thought the sound had come from, looked for anything out of place, broken branches, disturbed ground. Found nothing. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. By midwinter, things had gotten unsettling. The knocks continued every few nights, always 3 of them, always from somewhere out in the trees. Sometimes they'd come around sunset, sometimes deep in the night. I'd wake up and lie there in the dark, listening to them echo through the forest. I started keeping a log, wrote down the date and time every time I heard them. Thought maybe I could find a pattern, predict when they'd come. But there wasn't one. They were random, or at least seemed that way. The only constant was that they always came in groups of 3, and they were always from roughly the same direction, northeast of the cabin. One morning in January, after a night of snow, I found something new. I was walking down to check the creek, following my usual path when I saw them. Footprints. Large, deep impressions in the fresh snow, each one maybe 16 inches long and 6 inches wide. They came up from the creek bed, passed within 20 yards of the cabin, and disappeared back into the dense timber on the north side. I stood there staring at them for a long time. They didn't look like any animal I knew. Too big for a man, wrong shape for a bear. Bears' tracks have distinct claw marks and a different foot structure. These were almost human, but oversized. Impossibly oversized. I followed them as far as I could, up into the timber where the snow was thinner under the canopy. They led to a large pine tree where I found something else. The bark was stripped off in a vertical line, about 8 feet up from the ground. The wood underneath was fresh, pale, and raw. Whatever had done it couldn't have been standing on the ground. It would have had to be tall, very tall. I went back to the cabin and called Darby, told him what I'd found. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "You're seeing it too now." I asked him what he meant. He said, "The thing in the woods, been here longer than we have." I wanted to argue with him, tell him there had to be another explanation, but I couldn't think of one that made sense. That night, the knocks came again. 3 times. I didn't get up to look. I had to admit it to myself. I was alone one evening, sitting by the fire, and the word just slipped out. Bigfoot. I said it aloud, barely a whisper. It felt wrong to even speak it, like saying it would make it real, like acknowledging the possibility would somehow invite more of whatever this was into my life. I'd heard the stories growing up. Everyone in the Pacific Northwest has. The Patterson-Gimlin film, the countless sightings, the footprint casts and blurry photographs. I'd always filed it away with UFOs and lake monsters, things people claimed to see but never proved, entertainment for tourists and conspiracy theorists. But now I kept thinking about the hair I'd found caught in a broken branch near where the tracks had been. Coarse, reddish brown, longer than any animal hair I recognized. It didn't look like bear fur or deer. I'd put it in a plastic bag and kept it in a drawer, not sure what else to do with it. And there was the smell. Some nights, when the wind came from the northeast, there'd be this odor that hung in the air, musky, animal, but stronger than anything I'd encountered. It reminded me of wet fur, but there was something else underneath it. Something almost sweet, like rotting vegetation. It would drift in and linger for an hour or two, then disappear. I never mentioned any of this to anyone besides Darby. What would I say? That I thought Bigfoot was walking around my property? They'd think I'd lost my mind, been alone too long, started seeing things. Maybe they'd be right. I thought about that a lot during those weeks, whether grief and solitude could make you imagine things that weren't there. But the footprints were real. The stripped bark was real. The hair was real. And those 3 knocks kept coming, regular as anything, echoing through the trees in the dead of night. I started leaving my exterior lights on at night, started checking the locks more carefully. Kept a rifle by the door, though I wasn't sure what I'd do with it if I actually saw something. What do you do when you don't know if you're dealing with an animal, a person, or something else entirely? One morning in late February, I woke to see the tracks again, but this time they were closer, much closer. They came right up to the porch steps, circled around the cabin, and led off toward the woodshed. I could see where something had stood by my bedroom window. The prints were deep there, like it had stayed for a while. Looking in, watching, I checked the windows. Nothing was broken or tampered with, but there were marks in the frost, hand-shaped smudges where something might have pressed against the glass. The proportions were wrong for human hands, too large, fingers too thick. That night, the knocks came again, 3 of them, but this time they sounded different, closer, more insistent. I lay in bed listening, my heart hammering in my chest. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something else, a rustling outside near the woodpile, the sound of something large moving carefully, trying to be quiet but not quite managing it. I got up and looked out the window. The moon was nearly full, and I could see the yard clearly. At first, there was nothing. Then, at the edge of the tree line, I saw movement, a large shape, darker than the shadows around it. It was standing upright, had to be 7 or 8 feet tall. For maybe 10 seconds it stood there, perfectly still. Then it turned and moved back into the trees, moved smoothly, gracefully, despite its size. I stood at the window for an hour after that, watching. It didn't come back, but I knew what I'd seen. There was no denying it anymore. No way to rationalize it as a bear or a person or my imagination. Something was out there. Something that walked upright, stood taller than any man, and seemed to be coming closer to the cabin each time it visited. The question I couldn't answer was why? What did it want? Why my property? Why did it keep coming back? I thought about leaving, selling the place and moving back to civilization. But where would I go? And would it follow? I felt ridiculous even thinking that, but the thought wouldn't leave me alone. Whatever this was, it had chosen this place. And maybe it had chosen me. One evening in March, after weeks of this routine, I decided I had to see it clearly. Had to know for certain. I set up my old video camera on the porch, pointed it toward the tree line where I'd seen the shape. It was an old model, the kind that used tapes, but it still worked. I left it running every night, checking it each morning. For 2 weeks, Nothing. Just hours of footage showing an empty yard and swaying trees. I was starting to think I'd imagined the whole thing after all, that the isolation had finally gotten to me. Then, on a Tuesday night in late March, I heard the knocks again. 3 times, loud and clear. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the window. There, at the tree line illuminated by the porch light, I saw him. Not just a shadow this time. I could see his shape clearly. Massive shoulders, arms that hung below his knees, a head that seemed to sit directly on those shoulders with almost no neck. He was covered in dark hair, matted and thick. He stood there, maybe 40 yards away, completely still, watching the cabin, watching me. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity. Maybe it was only a minute or two, but time seemed to stop. I wasn't scared, which surprised me. I was something else. Awed, maybe. This thing that shouldn't exist, this creature from legends and blurry photographs, was standing in my yard. Real. Undeniable. Then he turned, slowly, and walked back into the trees. Didn't run or hurry, just walked away with that same smooth, powerful gait I'd seen before. I stood at the window until the cold drove me back to bed. In the morning, I checked the camera. My hands shook as I rewound the tape. There, in grainy night vision footage, he was visible. For maybe 20 seconds of video, you could see his shape at the tree line. It wasn't close enough for details, but it was enough. Enough to prove I wasn't crazy. Enough to show that something was really there. I watched that clip a dozen times. Then I ejected the tape, put it in a drawer, and never showed it to anyone. I knew what would happen if I did. People would come. Hunters, scientists, curiosity seekers. They'd tear through these woods looking for him. And I couldn't let that happen. I wasn't sure why I felt that way. But I did. This was his home. He'd been here longer than me, maybe longer than anyone, and somehow, for reasons I didn't understand, he'd chosen to reveal himself to me. I couldn't betray that. Wouldn't. A few months went by. Spring turned to summer. The knocks became less frequent, though they never stopped entirely. Once every 2 or 3 weeks I'd hear them. 3 sharp raps from somewhere in the trees. A reminder that he was still there, still watching. I developed a routine around it. When I heard the knocks, I'd go to the window and look out. Sometimes I'd see him standing at the tree line. Sometimes I wouldn't. But I always acknowledged them somehow. A nod, a raised hand, some small gesture to show I'd heard him. It sounds crazy when I say it like that, but that's what I did. And I think he understood. One evening in July, I was in the barn checking on the animals when I heard the knocks again, louder than usual, more insistent. The air felt different too, charged with something I couldn't name, heavy, like before a storm, though the sky was clear. I walked outside slowly. He was there, closer than he'd ever been before. Maybe 20 yards from the barn, standing in the tall grass near the fence line. In the fading daylight, I could see him clearly for the first time. The reddish-brown hair that covered his body. The massive hands. The face that was almost human, but not quite, with a flattened nose and deep-set eyes that caught the light. My heart was pounding, but I made myself stand still, made myself meet his gaze. We stood there looking at each other, and I had the strangest thought. This wasn't a monster. This wasn't something to be feared. This was an intelligence, a consciousness, something ancient and wise that I was never meant to understand. But here we were anyway. He didn't come any closer, just stood there watching me. His chest rose and fell with his breathing. His hands hung at his sides, fingers slightly curled. After a few minutes, he made a sound. Not the knocks this time. A low vocalization, something between a grunt and a hum. It resonated in my chest. Then he turned and walked away. Back into the trees, back into whatever world he came from. I stood in the yard until full dark. Not quite, believing what had just happened. When I finally went inside, my legs were shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about his eyes, about the intelligence I'd seen there. This wasn't an animal acting on instinct. This was someone, not something. Someone who had chosen to show himself to me again and again. Someone who, for whatever reason, wanted me to know he existed. I still don't know why. Why me? Why this place? But I stopped trying to figure it out. Some things I've learned you don't need to understand. You just need to accept them. We stood there for what felt like hours, though it was probably just minutes. The sun had set, and the world had gone gray with twilight. He hadn't moved. I hadn't moved. Two beings from different worlds, sharing a moment I never asked for and could never explain. I couldn't move. Didn't want to, really. I don't know why I didn't feel fear. Maybe because at that moment, I understood something fundamental. This wasn't about territory or threat or danger. This was about connection, recognition. He was showing himself to me deliberately, repeatedly, and that meant something. You don't keep coming back to someone you want to harm. His size was overwhelming. He had to be 8 feet tall, maybe more, with shoulders as broad as my doorway. His arms were thick as tree branches, and even standing still, he radiated power. He could have hurt me if he wanted to. Could have hurt me 100 times over the past months. But he hadn't even tried. He'd just watched, waited, knocked 3 times to announce himself, like a neighbor asking permission to visit. I thought about Carol then, about loss and loneliness and the ways we cope with absence, about how this creature, whatever he was, had become part of my life without my choosing it. How I'd gone from denying his existence to accepting it to something more complex. Protection, maybe. Kinship of a sort. We were both outsiders, both living on the edges of the world people knew. His eyes met mine, and I swear I saw recognition there. Not just awareness, but acknowledgement. He knew I saw him. He knew I'd kept his secret. And in that moment, I made a promise I didn't speak aloud. I would keep protecting him, would keep that tape in the drawer, would never tell anyone what I knew, what I'd seen, what stood before me in the dying light of a summer evening. He turned then, slowly and deliberately, and began walking away. Not hurried, not afraid, just leaving the way a person leaves after a conversation has reached its natural end. I watched him until he disappeared into the darkening forest, his shape becoming indistinct among the trees and shadows. I went inside and sat by the wood stove, though there was no fire lit. Sat there for a long time, processing what had happened, trying to make sense of the fact that Bigfoot, I could say the name freely now, at least in my own mind, was real, that he lived in these woods, that he'd chosen me to reveal himself, too. It changed something in me, made me feel less alone somehow, like the world was bigger and stranger and more wondrous than I'd let myself believe after Carol died. Like there were still mysteries left, still things that could surprise and awe me. I'd spent 30 years in grief and isolation. Maybe this was the universe's way of reminding me that life wasn't over yet. Since that day, he comes back. Every few months, like clockwork. Sometimes 2 months, sometimes 3. I've started to recognize the pattern, or the lack of one. He comes when he chooses, and I've accepted that I have no control over it. I just wait. Listen for those 3 knocks in the night. When they come, I go to the window or step outside. Sometimes I see him, sometimes I don't. But I always acknowledge them, always let him know I heard. It's become our language in a way. His knocks, my response, a conversation without words. I've never told anyone about him. Not the sheriff, who stopped by last winter to check on me after a bad storm. Not Darby, though I think he might suspect. Not the few relatives I still talk to on holidays. I keep the secret because I know what would happen if I didn't. They'd come looking for him, with cameras and rifles and traps. They'd turn these woods into a circus. They'd hunt him until they found him or drove him away forever. I won't let that happen. Can't let that happen. Whatever this creature is, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, forest giant, he's trusted me with his presence. He's shown himself to me dozens of times now, and that means something. It's a responsibility I didn't ask for, but I've accepted it. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I did show someone the tape, if I called a researcher or a news station or uploaded it to the internet. The tape's still in my drawer, sitting there with the plastic bag containing that reddish-brown hair. Evidence of something that shouldn't exist. Proof that would change everything people think they know about the world. But I keep it hidden, because I realize now that some things aren't meant to be proven. Some mysteries are supposed to stay mysteries. Not because the truth isn't real, but because revealing it would destroy what makes it special. The world would turn him into a specimen, a curiosity, a thing to be studied and categorized and controlled. And that would be wrong. That would be a betrayal. He's not a specimen. He's not a thing. He's someone who lives in these woods, who has his own life and his own reasons for being here. Someone who, for whatever reason, decided I could be trusted. And I won't break that trust. So I wait. And when the knocks come, I listen. When I see him standing at the tree line, I acknowledge him. We have this understanding now, this silent agreement. He doesn't come too close. I don't tell anyone he exists. We live our separate lives that occasionally intersect, two lonely beings on the edge of the world. It's enough. More than enough, really. In the years since Carol's died, this is the closest thing I've had to companionship. Strange as that sounds, impossible as it is, but that's the truth of it. That's the story I'm finally telling, here in my cabin in late September, with the wind picking up and the smell of wet pine in the air. The knocks still come, 3 raps on wood, echoing through the trees, sometimes in the middle of the night when the world is silent and dark, sometimes during the day when I'm outside working. Each time it's like he's saying, "I'm here. I haven't forgotten you." I'm 66 now. My joints ache more than they used to. The cold gets into my bones in a way it didn't when I was younger. I wonder sometimes how much longer I'll be able to stay out here, maintain this life I've built. And I wonder what will happen to him when I'm gone. Will he knock on someone else's door? Will he retreat further into the wilderness? Will he miss our strange, silent friendship? These are questions I'll never have answers to, but they sit with me on quiet evenings when I'm watching the fire die down and listening to the wind in the pines. Last week, I heard the knocks again, went to the window and saw him standing there in the moonlight. He's gotten grayer, I think. The hair around his face has more silver in it than I remember. Or maybe I'm just projecting, seeing my own aging reflected back at me. But he looked different somehow. Older, more weathered, like the years have passed for him the same way they've passed for me. I raised my hand. He didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, he raised his hand too, lifted that massive arm and held it up, palm facing me. It was the first time he'd ever done that, the first time he'd acknowledged me so directly, so human-like. My throat tightened. I stood there with my hand raised, matching his gesture, and felt something break open inside me. Some dam I'd built after Carol died, after the baby died, after I'd decided to be alone forever. We stayed like that for maybe a minute. Then he lowered his hand, turned, and walked back into the trees. I watched him go, my arm still raised, until he disappeared completely. I don't know what that moment meant. Don't know if he was saying goodbye or hello or something else entirely. But it felt significant. Felt like the end of something, or maybe the beginning of something new. Like our relationship, whatever strange form it takes, had evolved, deepened. I still have the tape, still have that bag of hair, still have all the evidence tucked away in a drawer where no one will ever find it. Sometimes I take the tape out and watch those 20 seconds of footage, just to remind myself that it's real, that all of this happened, that I'm not crazy, not making it up, not lost in some grief-induced delusion. He's real. Bigfoot is real, and he comes to visit me every few months. here in my cabin near the Cascades, in the last years of my life. It's the strangest truth I've ever carried, and I'll carry it to my grave. I don't know how much longer this will last. I've been here 30 years, and I can feel time running out. Not dramatically, not immediately, but it's there, that awareness that all things end, that eventually this cabin will belong to someone else, or no one, that the woods will go on without me, that he'll knock on these trees for someone who isn't here to answer. So I wait, and I listen. The wind picks up again outside, the way it does every September, bringing that smell of wet pine and fallen leaves. There's a storm coming. I can feel it. The temperature's dropping, and the light through the windows has that particular gray quality it gets before serious weather. I've added extra wood to the pile, checked the roof, done all the things you do when you've lived through enough winters to respect them. Tonight, I'll probably hear them again. Those 3 knocks, steady and deliberate, coming from somewhere out in the trees. They'll echo across the clearing, through the darkness, finding me here where I've always been. And I'll get up, like I always do, and go to the window. Maybe I'll see him standing there at the tree line. Maybe I won't, but I'll acknowledge him either way. I'll let him know I heard, that I'm still here, still keeping his secret, still protecting whatever trust we've built over these 30 years. People ask me sometimes why I stay out here, why I don't move closer to town, why I live alone in the woods at my age. I never tell them the real reason. How could I? They wouldn't understand. They'd think I was senile or delusional or making up stories for attention. So I just say I like the quiet, like the solitude, that the woods have always been home to me. And that's true enough, even if it's not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I'm waiting for him, that every few months when I hear those knocks, something in me comes alive, something that's been dormant since Carol died, since I lost everything that mattered. He reminds me that the world still holds mysteries, that there are still things beyond human understanding, that I'm not as alone as I thought I was. It's almost dark now. The fire's burning steady, and I've got my coffee cup in my hand, watching the last of the daylight fade through the windows. Any time now, if the pattern holds, I'll hear them. 3 knocks from the forest, and I'll be ready. I'm always ready. There it is, faint at first, then clearer. Knock, 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 3 times, like always. I set down my coffee and stand up. My knees protest, but I make my way to the window. Out there, at the edge of the clearing, I can just make out his shape in the failing light. Tall and still, watching, waiting. I place my palm against the cold glass and nod once. He nods back, or maybe I'm imagining it. But I don't think I am. After 30 years, we understand each other. We know what this is, what it means, what it will always mean. The creature from the woods and the man in the cabin, sharing this impossible truth that no one else will ever know.